Good morning, church. Good morning. Many times we're just living our lives every day, and something happens that catches us up short. Something happens that stops us in our tracks, and it may be something good. We hear from somebody we haven't heard from in a long time. We run into a friend unexpectedly. We may receive unexpected good news. Other times it's bad to be caught up short. Something may happen that shocks us or scares us. It might be an unexpected bill, a friend or a relative who is suddenly sick, an accident that hurts somebody we love, or somebody breaks into our car or house. We're stopped in our tracks. We're caught short. We're surprised and maybe overwhelmed. This is a theme that runs all through the epistles to the Thessalonians. Paul is saying Jesus is coming, and this is going to happen when you're not ready for it. So be ready. Don't be caught short. Live in a way that you'll always be ready for the unexpected return of Jesus. He says, live in a way that prepares you for the coming of Jesus, that you may be blameless when he comes. Now think about Advent, the story of Advent. When Jesus was born in Bethlehem on the first Christmas, nearly everybody was caught short. They were surprised. Mary was not ready to have a baby. Joseph was not ready to marry. The hotel didn't have any rooms. The shepherds were not prepared to travel, nor were the wise men ready to find a baby in a barn. And Herod was not ready for a challenger to his throne. Everyone was caught short. That's what Paul says. If we're not ready for Jesus, we'll be caught short and not be found blameless. In the early 19th century, there was a preacher who had a great following named William Miller. He had a great following in the New England states, in New York, Massachusetts particularly. And he predicted that Jesus would come again on October 22nd, 1844, and the world would end. So many of his followers quit their jobs, they neglected their farms, they sold what they had, and you know it was serious because the women were giving their jewelry away. Many people had white ascension robes made so they'd be ready for the big day. People in Groton, Massachusetts climbed the local mountain to wait for Jesus. There was an old man from Harvard who couldn't climb the mountain, so he perched in an apple tree in his backyard waiting for Jesus. A lot of people were on their roofs waiting for Jesus. But Jesus didn't come October 22nd, 1844. These people were caught short. They had been neglecting their jobs and their farms. They had run out of money. They became restless, and they had to start over again after their big disappointment. There's a couple of stories that also go. The second one would be Tanya Tucker had a song called Delta Dawn that tells the story of a crazy lady in Texas. She was 41 years old, and her daddy still called her baby. She walked around town every day with an old suitcase, wearing a tattered wedding gown, waiting for her fiancé to come back home. Well, the story was a stranger had come to town and swept her off her feet. And he said, well, I've got to go out of town, but I'm coming back, so wait for me. We'll get married. I've got a great mansion, and you'll be a queen in my house. He never came back. So every day she walked the streets of her town in a faded old wedding dress, carrying a suitcase with a dried up flower on her dress. She came up short. There's another country song that I remember and I couldn't find it, but it's about a woman whose man went out for cigarettes. 3 years later, she's still waiting for him to come home. She also was caught short. Well, how do we live in Advent? How do we live in the expectation of the return of Jesus without becoming a Millerite or a Delta Dawn? How do we keep Advent fresh, real, and meaningful without turning it into something strange or weird? The Old Testament prophets prophesied and pointed to a dark and scary day to come. And they called it the day of the Lord. And there's probably 2 or 3 or perhaps 4 events that can be called the day of the Lord. They described it as a climax of history. And they said this day would be a day of reckoning, when evil would be judged, God's people would be rescued, God would step out of heaven and reveal himself to us. Now the prophets were right. The day of the Lord came. But as in Advent, nobody realized it. There was no fireball from heaven. There was no earthquake. There was no cosmic storm, no sounds of battles or terrors of plagues. The day of the Lord came quietly, so quietly that the only news bulletin that was placed was a star in the sky over where Jesus was born. And then it was so late that most everybody missed that. The day of the Lord came not as people expected. It came as a whisper and not a windstorm. It was a bell and not a cymbal. It was dew on the grass and not a windstorm or a thunderstorm. In the quiet of Bethlehem's manger, God came into our world in baby Jesus. On Christmas night, on our road of human history, Jesus stepped into our world. Now, we're still awaiting the return of Jesus, another day of the Lord. And we must travel this road with anticipation, but not being crazy like Delta Dawn or William Miller. Well, Paul in 1 Thessalonians and 2 Thessalonians said there's two kinds of people that travel this road to Advent. There's the people, first of all, who sleep through the trip. They move down the road, but they don't know what kind of road they're on. Now, I have a group of high school, college buddies that I meet once a year for a reunion. And we meet in different places, and we take turns choosing the place we're going to meet. Well, a few years ago, we met in Colorado, and we went up Pikes Peak in a car. And the guy who drove had already had a heart attack, but I didn't want to drive, and nobody else wanted to drive. But I was seated on the outside, and if you go up Pikes Peak and you look out the window, you're looking way down. And it seems like it's bottomless. Well, I'm not afraid of many things. I've told you before, I'll fight anybody and I'll eat anything. I've had my nose broken 3 times. The first time with Golden Gloves, the second time was basketball, and the third time was playground football. I have eaten wild game and turtle and snake and alligator, cow tongue, and parts of animals that I will not tell you about. But I don't like heights. I don't like ladders. I don't like being on top of the house. I don't like going to the Empire State Building Observatory because I can't get close to the edge. I can, but it's dangerous for me to do that. But I didn't drive up Pikes Peak, but I rode. I sat in the back seat and generally looked at my lap. I didn't look out the window at the edge of the mountain with no guardrails that looked straight down. And many times we walk down the road of life like that. We miss the panorama of beauty, wonder, and magnificence because we don't look past the road. We go through life as a march and not an adventure. We are traveling on a road on the edge of eternity, and we don't look over the edge. And when we ignore Advent, when we give up expectation, we don't see the wonder of the world that Jesus brought to us, we lose. We're caught short. If we don't look out the window over the side of the road, we'll miss things that money can't buy. We won't hear a language that can't be spoken. We won't see the waves of eternity foaming at our feet. If we sleep on the road to Advent, we'll only have a Merry Christmas every year that's here today and gone tomorrow. Well, there are some people who travel the road who travel that road wide awake. Paul says, don't be like those people that won't look over the edge. Be wide awake. Look out the window. Look over the edge. Don't be afraid to move it into eternity now by taking the road there now. We can be tempted to sit in our seat, looking at our laps, ignoring the future, or we can be tempted to dream and fly and embrace the future. When Paul talks about Jesus coming again, he's calling us to live life to the full now, to drive down the road on the edge of eternity and look over the edge. So it's not crazy to celebrate Advent and to celebrate it every year. We do. There's even better things coming. So watch the road, but also look past the road and be looking for that distant island. Look over the edge. Look into the horizon. Advent is adoring the mystery of love. Amen. And thanks be to God for Advent.